Good evening, Planning Policy. It's nice to see all of you. We were just talking about a doodle poll. Who would rather be outside than in here right now? Check. Well, I appreciate everybody being here tonight. It's been a while since we've met last. I would like to call the May 11th Planning Policy Commission to order, and it is currently 6:32 p.m. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Attendance. Kristen, do we have a quorum tonight?
We do have a quorum, and Commissioner Bader has an excused absence tonight.
Excellent, thank you. And I'd also like to take this moment to introduce our newest commissioner, Mr. John Crass. So nice to see you, nice to have you with us. So again, a little housekeeping, and our first item of business is to take action to approve the minutes for the March 23rd PPC meeting. Are there any corrections to the draft minutes provided in your agenda packet? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Moving right along, our next order of business is public comment. So the guidelines for tonight's public comments are they may be made in person or virtually. And for all of those who would like to speak, we ask that you speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. And if you are attending virtually by computer or by phone and would like to speak, in addition to the above, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, try to join the meeting using a different device or use the call-in information in the meeting invite. These are an important part of the public process, and we take them seriously. And we do ask that you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Kristen and Thomas, do we have anyone who would like to make public comments?
Chair Voice, we have nobody signed up for public comments.
Okay. So our first item of regular business tonight are nominations and elections. The following process is what we're going to use, and we will be electing the chair and vice chair. First, I will be calling for nominations, and once they've been made, I will close the nominations. If only one nomination is made, that member is considered elected by unanimous consent. If multiple nominations are made, we'll hold time at our next meeting for an election process. So let's get started. Are there any nominations for chair?
I'd like to note that you all received an email from Commissioner Bader nominating Chair Voice for chair.
Can I second it?
Are there any other nominations? All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to working with you guys, and I hope the next year that everyone's proud to be a part of this commission and hopefully proud to have me as a colleague and chair. So now we will move on to the vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? And I myself would like to nominate Vice Chair Bader. Yes. Are there any other nominations? Well, Sarah, if you're watching or listening, congratulations. All right, our elections are done, so now we will be moving on to our next item on regular business, which is our Housing Action Work Plan implementation. And tonight we'll be discussing a bit about the HAPPY grant, as well as diversity of housing. Kristen, you're up.
Okay, a little sooner than I thought it would be. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to get some out of the way. Okay, and that doesn't want to work. Interesting. There we go. It's a little slow. So yes, we are talking about diversity of housing tonight. I'm Kristen Leeson. I'm a senior planner with Community Planning and Development. It's nice to see you all. Welcome, Commissioner Crass. So tonight our meeting expectations are I'm going to present, and then we're going to have you all ask questions. And then at our next meeting on the 23rd, we'll be holding a public hearing for proposed amendments. So if there's any additional information that you all need in order to make a recommendation at the next meeting, let us know tonight, and we can provide that to you. Also, if you think of anything between now and the next 2 weeks, you can always email us and ask us questions then as well. So it's a big list of questions for tonight, and some of it has to do with our meeting on the 23rd. Some of it is moving beyond that to 2024 and work that'll happen then, but it has to do with, we'll go over them later, but do you agree with the proposed amendments now that we're going to do? Should we consider reevaluating some of our development regulations and parking requirements? So we'll talk about that in more detail at the end. You guys are going to see this a lot. Housing is as you know, excuse me, a big issue in Issaquah. It's a regional issue. It's a United States issue. There's a shortage of housing. So this kind of lays out what is involved in our housing. So we go from unsheltered homeless to emergency shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, subsidized housing, affordable housing with covenants that's rental and ownership, and on to market rate rental and ownership housing. So the full spectrum of it. The arrows below it kind of show the different programs and funding and policies that we have that cover this range of housing. Tonight, we are going to talk specifically about the market rate rental and ownership housing, and that a lot of that work has been covered with funding from the HAPPY grant. So you may recall we received $100,000 from the Department of Commerce. The intent is to implement our housing action plan. We hired Eco Northwest as our consultant. We were working on 3 strategies from our housing element. The first one is Housing Strategy 6, which is to expand inclusionary zoning. The second, Strategy 7, is to remove deterrence to condominium construction. And the third was Strategy 8, which is to allow or increase our diversity of housing in the city. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the work that was done for 6 and 7, and we're going to come back to that in about 2024, okay? But I'll tell you what's been done, and then we're going to focus on Strategy 8 and have a longer conversation about that. So Strategy 6 is inclusionary zoning, and inclusionary zoning is simply a requirement that developers must include a percentage of affordable units as part of any market rate rental or homeowner developments. And I made the A in gold and uppercased it, capital, whatever, because affordable means that this one has covenants tied to it. So they're going to be affordable in this case for, if it's rental, the life of the building as it exists as a rental unit, as an apartment building, or homeowner as at least for 50 years. Okay. We currently have this program. It exists you're required to do inclusionary zoning in our mixed-use central Issaquah, urban core, and vertical mixed-use overlay zones. And we wanted to expand it. First, we looked at, you can't really expand it until you know what's going on with the existing one, right? So we looked at the existing one, and we have no residential development in any of those zones. So why isn't it happening? If residential development isn't happening, we can't get the affordable housing, right? So one of the reasons is because the land values are so high right now, and construction costs have shot through the roof. So those certainly don't help when trying to build affordable housing, especially. And additionally, some of our development requirements, such as structured parking, the number of affordable units required, and the percentages at which we require those, aren't working. Our affordable units, the number of them, we may be requiring too many. And our percentage of AMI, which is area median income, that might be a little too low. So we're going to come back and look at that. And can we expand it, which was our original intent? Nope, not right now. We can't do that. We need to fix what's broken first and then go back and see if we can expand it. So 2 things that we're going to be doing soon, 2024, are a parking study, which will also look at structured parking. And we're going to be looking at the same time, we'll go back and we'll look at impervious surface and zoning and densities and all these things that go with it. And it's a balancing act. How much do you have to increase this or decrease this to make it all work out? So that's what we need to do, but we can't do it without the parking study. So the next one was the condominium development, Strategy 7. Condominiums it's a statewide issue. Back in 1989, the state passed a law that actually put restrictions or deterrents to developers. They're risk adverse. So if there are construction defects, the developers are held responsible for certain periods of time. And that keeps a lot of developers, if they can't build, 300 units in a building and they can only build 20, they're not going to want to do it. So that's a problem, especially for smaller cities like ours. Bellevue, you see them in Seattle, but not here. So we want stacked condominiums because they provide a more affordable ownership. When you do them stacked as opposed to side by side, they're smaller, and then they become a little bit more affordable. So I already talked about how they're subject to liabilities that were enacted by the state. And so right now, we've realized there's nothing that we can do locally. Our code is okay. It's the state. So we need to, and we also, our market, like I said, we're not Bellevue, we're not Seattle, so our market doesn't quite fit that bill right now. So moving forward, we're just going to continue to make recommendations to the state that reduce risk to developers through our legislative agendas. Moving on, before I move on, do you guys have any questions about those?
Do you want to say anything about new legislation that came through this year in condominium and when that might come into play? I know we're not talking about this till next year, and I can wait.
The only one I know, they did make some changes, but they're not really going to affect Issaquah.
Not material?
No.
Thank you.
No. Okay, so moving on, strategy 8, increasing housing diversity. So this is market rate affordable housing. So the idea is that we would get smaller housing in there and therefore more housing, and then maybe the prices go down, right? There are no covenants attached to these. So what we discovered, what our consultants discovered for us, is that we're actually doing pretty well compared to other cities when you look at the diversity of housing. So we have more 5+ units of owner-occupied housing, and that's through townhomes, that kind of housing. We have about the same number of apartments as other cities that are in the area. We have more duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes than all other cities. And we have less, and this is a good thing, we have less single-family housing than other cities. That just means that we are diversifying, right? So we still want single-family housing, but we're diversified a little bit more than others. But we still want more, right? We want more options for developers. So we looked at 3 different types. We looked at courtyard apartments, we looked at cottage housing, and we looked at micro units. And we only at this time looked in multifamily zones, because single-family zones, we knew that the state was making changes, and we didn't want to do anything. And they've made quite a few. And if you want to talk about those later, we can. But we'll get into much more depth on those later. But I'm happy to talk about them. But knowing that the state was going to be making changes to single-family neighborhoods and the requirements there, we decided to hold off on that one. So we just looked at multifamily. So what we looked at is these 3 different types. How do they compare to other housing types? And MF, multifamily high, which would also be, now that we've adopted it, multifamily high East Sunset, multifamily medium, and multifamily high Old Town, and mixed-use residential zones. And then are there any regulatory changes that we could make in our development code to make development more feasible for people, for these types? So the first one I'm going to talk about are courtyard apartments. So these are several attached units around a central courtyard. They're usually 1 to 3 stories high. And that's about it. They've got 2 examples right there. You see them a lot in California and Chicago. Here's a table that kind of shows what they found. So the first 2 columns are multifamily medium and multifamily high. The last column is a comparison to, it's an existing unit someplace else where they compared it. So you can see that when they looked at courtyard apartments in our MFM and MFH, we were only able to get about 14.4 dwelling units per acre, whereas the comparison got 21.8. Yet, in the comparisons, the lot size was quite a bit smaller. The number of units was the same. The gross building area was about the same, which means that our critical areas played a big role in this. And actually, more importantly, our impervious surface played a role in this. That they had the same unit size, same number of floors, same bedrooms. We require 2 parking stalls per unit in MFH and MFM. Most areas you'll find 1, or a lot of areas you'll find 1. I shouldn't say most. Thomas can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot. And our impervious coverage, we have 50% in our 2 zones there, and in the example, they had 60%. And because of primarily the impervious and the parking stalls, they were able to get more units per acre. And the asterisk is there under multifamily high because so our density, our maximum density in multifamily medium is 14.52 units per dwelling units per acre. In multifamily high, it's actually 29 dwelling units per acre, but you can only get halfway there under the existing regulations if you do courtyard apartments. So what we found is, so actually courtyard apartments would be allowed by code now, but we don't have a definition. It's not included in our permitted uses table. The impervious surface and parking requirements limit the number of dwelling units, and like with everything else, the high land prices and the construction costs slow things down as well. It just, the land value plus the construction costs on top means that they're not going to get as much in return once they build, unless they can get the density. Any questions?
Whoever wants to go first, Chair.
Commissioner Issaquah?
Yeah, would you say like the courtyard housing is more feasible in Issaquah, or another type of housing that's more high-rise?
It's really not the city, it's the zone.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, as you could see in that one, people are going to get closer to the density. More people are more likely to do it if they can achieve the maximum density, and they can in multifamily medium, not in multifamily high the way it's set up. So in multifamily high, they'd be more likely to do something where it's a little taller. You know, where you can do apartments and get more units in there.
Okay. I think we have one of those in the Highlands, basically. A few others. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. This is good stuff. I need some help, though, because I can't remember how to read all the numbers in this table, and so pardon me for forgetting. When we're talking about lot size, so many of the numbers are exactly the same, and why are some of them different? I know you just explained it all, but it went a little bit past me. So it was lot size and the effective dwelling units per acre that was messing me up. Can you do that again?
Sure. So the lot sizes, they looked at, our lot sizes that they looked at were just about 18,000 square feet. And
So this is in effect, this is the lot sizes that we
these
have,
are what
or is
exists,
this
they looked at an existing lot.
existing lots? This
existing
isn't a
lots.
minimum or a maximum
No.
lot? This is the kind of lots we have? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, because I don't think anyway, they looked at existing lots, and they used a comparison lot that was only almost 12,000 square feet. So the lot size starting off was smaller. Once,
Commissioner Krass?
So I think, is lot size more of an output of the two things of parking and impervious coverage? Because of those exist, you have to have a bigger lot to be able to get those number of units, and that's why those are. So if those are long-term changed, the numbers, you could do the same number of units on a smaller lot. Are we thinking about that the correct way?
so the lot size is just a flat-out piece of land.
I know, but that's, a developer would want to put as many units as they can. But if
Right.
you have to have a certain number of parking spots and impervious service, that then caps of how many you could put there for things. in the
Exactly.
future.
You have to have a certain number of spots for each unit. So Commissioner Millen, going back to yours and the other number that's different, two of the other numbers that are different, to Commissioner Krass's point, is the parking. So, you might want to fit 20 units in there, but then that's 40 parking spaces. And those are expensive. I mean, even just surface parking, it's, Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, about $40,000 a space, right? Sometimes higher. So that's expensive for each unit you're going to build, and it just doesn't pencil out for people. Yeah. So what this is showing is that even though some of their numbers were smaller, because their parking was smaller and because they had bigger impervious, they were able to build out further. They were able to get more units on there. Because 20 units, or 6 units, they only had 6 parking spaces. 6 units, ours had to have 12.
Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. This might be a question for after you go through all the housing types, so feel free to punt it to the end. But looking at the questions of what we're looking to recommend in terms of changes, why would we want to go with a lower density solution in a multifamily high, where we could potentially get higher density?
And that came up a lot. That's why these aren't being recommended in mixed use or urban core. Excuse me. That's a really, really, really good point. And one of the things that was brought up, but we had to look at these. These are things that are it's in our housing strategy, in our housing action work plan. And they said we need to look at different uses throughout the city. So agreed. And maybe we will go back and look at these. And once we do single family small lot and single family duplex, maybe we'll look at these there. I don't know. But yes.
But if I'm reading the chart right, and I'm with Commissioner Milligan, I'm not positive I'm reading the chart right, for multifamily medium, it could be a perfect match, right?
It could be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And then if development regulations were changed, land costs went down, it could actually work in multifamily high too if we allowed the density to go higher. Yeah. So that's why this is a whole balancing act thing. If we can't just make these changes now, we need to wait on more information so that we can look at it holistically. Okay.
Any
Ready?
other questions?
Okay. All right. You're going to hear a similar story with cottage housing. Cottage housing is compact development of detached dwelling units that are also generally around a central courtyard. Okay, and there's 1,200 square feet to 1,700 square feet. That's usually about what they are. You're going to see some of these on our tour. See a similar chart. Look at this. In this case, our lot size was about 29,000 square feet. The comparison lot size was, 27,500 square feet. They were able to get 6 units on each lot. They put 6 units on each lot. The gross building area, so you take out impervious, and that was pretty close to each other. The average unit size, the ones in Issaquah, multifamily medium and multifamily high, were slightly higher because we require 2 parking spaces per lot. And so they actually did it in a 2-car garage, which could either be the kind front, one behind the other, which that name escapes me. Pardon me? Tandem, yes, thank you, tandem, or side by side. I'm not sure how they did it, but it accounted for that space there as well, which is why the lot size was a little bit bigger. 2 floors for each of them, 3 bedrooms, parking stalls per unit, 2 for us, 1 for them. Impervious surface was a big difference. Ours is 50%, the one that the city had was 73%, and they were able to get 14.8 units, dwelling units per acre, and we got 9. So again, very similar, and remember multifamily medium, and Commissioner Altamore, this is, to your point, multifamily medium, kind of close to what they could get, which is 14.5, but in multifamily high, it's a third of what a developer could get if they just went in and built apartments right now. So same thing, almost the same story, but except that they say that the consultants say this might be feasible or competitive under existing regulations if the land prices are really what they're assessed at. But as we know, the market value is a lot higher than the King County assessment. Duplexes might outcompete cottages because they can do more density there. They don't have the street or the common shared space that you have to use with cottage housing. And impervious surface and parking requirements, again, limit the densities that we can get. It's a very similar story. Any questions?
Okay, in both of these types, especially this one is saying that these are basically allowed now, the cottage housing. How much of this do we have? You said we have some examples of cottage. Do we have any examples of courtyard?
Actually, this one is not allowed.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
It was allowed in the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, so Issaquah Highlands has some courtyard housing.
Okay.
But it's not allowed in the,
But
yes, sorry,
detached.
cottage housing. It is allowed, it's not allowed in the rest of the city.
And then the courtyard is not yet allowed?
So cottage housing is not allowed. It was only allowed in the Highlands through the development agreement. Courtyard housing is not allowed. I mean, I'm sorry, it is allowed, it's not in the code. There are too many Cs.
I got a quick follow-up for you, Kristen. As an example of courtyard apartments, I'm thinking, think with me, map of Issaquah, south from like the Issaquah Coffee House. Are those apartments down there by kind of like, right, so you're thinking of Gilman Village? And you go south from the Issaquah Coffee House. There's that apartment complex there that kind of follows the creek. Would that be considered courtyard apartments?
Sorry, I'm not picturing it, but I'll show you a picture.
Okay, sure. I want to say it is, but
This one right here, let me go back up here. The one on the top, it has a gate there and kind of an archway, but inside there's a courtyard. This isn't a very good example, is it? And then this one right here, the one on the bottom, see the one on the top? You see how that just sort of makes a U shape? And the courtyard faces the street? That's a courtyard apartment. And sometimes they have, this one happens to have a garage in the back. A lot of them don't even require parking, and they just park on the street.
please.
So why can't they build that? If the density allowed to build a courtyard apartment building, why aren't they building it?
I don't know.
Well, is it, I mean, I'm thinking that there are other elements besides, if this number of apartments is allowed on the piece of land, and you could build it in a box, and they're building it in a box instead of building it in a courtyard.
Be-
then you know what I mean?
I'm not a developer.
Yeah.
But if they fill in the courtyard space with units, they're going to make more money. So
Yeah.
that takes out the courtyard. So
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
but,
it's not the fact of the ratio of the impervious surface.
yeah,
it's
that
the-
one's, right. In MFM, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. You ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay. Micro units. You've probably heard of these. They're also sometimes called apartments. They are between about 125 to 400 square feet. Sometimes they have kitchenettes, sometimes they don't. They would often share a kitchen. 5 units would share one centralized kitchen and living room. That's what some of them do. They have, and I just said it, some have access to larger shared kitchens, bathrooms, and community space. And they're pretty popular. So looking at these, we only looked at MUR. And we looked at smaller ones. So the ones that they looked at, we're going to get around 135, if we were going to do it in Issaquah, about 135 units. A lot of these will get closer to 350 units. But we said that's, which we could still do in urban core and mixed use, central Issaquah. But we were looking at expanding it too. We were looking outside of that too. So we looked at MUR. And I'll be honest, I don't fully remember the reasons why it wasn't going to work in MFH and MFM, and I can ask our consultants and come back to you on that. But the one where they said it would work would probably be MUR. And I think it's because of the amount of density that's allowed in MUR, and that there's no density cap. It's rather a floor area ratio that you have to work with. So there's more building space in there. I think that's what it was. So lot sizes were about the same, 1,000 feet off. We got 20 dwelling units. They got 30. Same size gross building area, same unit average size. Floors, because we require structured parking. And this is probably why we got 20 units and the other one got 30. We require structured parking. So they were building above, and the structured parking is a lot more than $40,000 for each parking spot, a lot. Then we also require 0.4 stalls per unit. The other places don't, a lot of places don't, but the impervious surface was the same. So here, really, the structured parking was the issue, and why they were able to get 315 units and we got 165. So again, these would be allowed by code, but it's not defined. It's not allowed in the permitted uses table. And I even, few years ago, we went and were touring micro units in Kirkland, and they said, oh, we'd love to come to Issaquah, but you guys don't allow them. And we really hadn't looked at our code, and we went, just, doing this one, oh, they could have come here, but it's not apparent. So we would need to change that. Not financially feasible in MFH and MFM. Again, I think it's because of the densities, the density caps that we have. But they can get less, I've already said this, less dense micro units would be feasible in MUR with changes in some of the regulations, particularly structured parking. So the recommendations in general, overall for all of these, would be to add definitions, add permitted uses table, reevaluate parking requirements, reevaluate including structured parking, reevaluate impervious surface, and potentially reevaluate the allowable densities in those areas. Specifically for cottage housing, there are other allowances that I didn't really mention because you have to get in, we haven't looked at design standards yet, so sometimes you have a drive down the middle, sometimes there are garages attached, sometimes you have separate parking lots, but we would need to look at doing things like smaller setbacks and maybe narrower drive aisles for these areas to make them work. And then for micro units, they said remove, but we would reevaluate parking requirements, especially structured parking in these areas. So our proposal right now is simple. It's to add definitions of cottage housing and courtyard apartments, add definitions for micro units, and then add add all of these to the permitted uses table. Courtyard apartments in MFH and HES, MFM and MOT, and MUR, mixed use residential. And I agree, maybe they wouldn't happen there, but it doesn't hurt to allow them. So, you know, and then cottage housing in two of those zones, in multifamily high and multifamily medium, and then micro units in mixed use residential, mixed use central Issaquah, and urban core. That's what we would propose. This would come back to you all on the 25th, go to the Planning and Development Environment Committee potentially, we're not sure if it needs to go yet, on the June 6th, and then back to council for action. One of the reasons we want to make these amendments too is because the HAPPY grant requires, it's an implementation grant. So some development regulations need to be adopted and these need to be done. So they're just surface, they would be, you know, tip of the iceberg amendments that we would do. Once the parking study is done, we would then reevaluate parking structures, reevaluate parking requirements, look at impervious surface, and look at density requirements. So that's what I had. Any questions? And then we can get into direction.
Commissioners, the floor is open for questions. Did I say him? Commissioner Milligan.
I'll warm it up. A minute ago, you said that we would evaluate parking after we had a parking study, but then I thought the slide before you said you wanted us to consider reducing parking requirements.
No, those are some of the recommendations from the
Go
consultant.
Northwest.
So that is not on the table next?
Not next.
meeting.
So this list right here that we were looking at, that's their full list of general recommendations.
Evaluate parking requirements, that's the parking study.
Right.
That's not us right now.
No.
It's just doing a parking study.
Right.
And evaluate impervious surfaces, that's not us,
Not right now.
not right now. So are we doing the other three?
Other
Increase
two,
allowable
because we're not looking at densities yet either.
So right now it's just add definitions.
And add to the permitted use
Yes.
table. Okay, let me think about that. Could you go back to the slide with the permitted use table, please?
Yes. This one?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's small.
Right. I mean, I personally don't really see a problem with adding the definitions. I'm a little bit more hesitant with the table just because you're talking about a major change. And again, in a half-hour meeting, it's hard to say. I mean, even though I trust staff, that's the only one I'm a little hesitant on myself.
What is your concern with adding the uses?
Well, I mean, like I said, we don't have micro units, correct, in the city at all,
Right.
right? And then we also don't have cottage housing in the city at all. So that's the only one I'm a little hesitant on, just because and again, like you said, it's not like anyone's gonna be building these tomorrow. It very well that people won't even build them, just because right now the high cost of construction and land, but it's still a big permission slip.
Well, but like I said, micro units would still be allowed right now. They're just not defined. Yeah, I mean, it's just the way you build it. It's just not spelled out, but, yeah,
I guess, so is that the cart before the horse? Wouldn't we want the definitions first?
we would. But nobody's done micro units, so we would still be putting well, whatever. We'd be doing it the right way.
Commissioner Esamlata?
So these are, we'd be given definitions to housing types or zoning that aren't in existence right now, but at least it'll help guide developers and even the citizens later on if they choose to follow one of these means of housing, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Commissioner Altamore?
I think I saw this on one of your slides, but in a future consideration, there will be talking about this in single family. It's just right now, we're only talking in multifamily zones.
Right, yes, we've talked about it, and like I said, we have all the state bills coming forward that have now been passed and we need to look at, so this should be a part of it, yeah.
And these are all going to be requirements from that legislation?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily, yeah. Our intention was to look at these in single-family zones, yes. And now we have this other legislation to look at. I think we just need to evaluate it all together,
Sure.
yeah.
Commissioner Milligan?
When do we evaluate the criteria, so the definitions? Some of the things I remember from the packet and from some other experience I have is how these, especially cottage and courtyard apartments, are served by utilities and drive. When would we be looking at that sort of thing, as that impacts cost so much and is often a determining factor?
Well, I mean, as far as, you're talking water and sewer roads and that kind of thing. So what we're proposing right now doesn't exceed any densities that are already allowed. But when we look at single family and we have to start allowing more units in single family zones, that does impact utilities. So we've already started talking to Public Works about the effects that some of the changes might have.
I think one thing I'm getting at is that, yeah, especially with cottage, if you have to have individual service to each home, and then so that kind of pairs up with a consideration for cottage of condo cottage. How would that work in the way that we allow for multiple?
So that's an interesting one, and oh, shoot, that's what I was going to ask her. It's one of those things where you had a question come up earlier in the day, and I thought I need to call her and ask, and then I forgot my question, so I never got back to it. That was it.
Well, you can keep that for next
Okay,
time.
but we are changing our code to allow for fee simple units.
Okay.
And I think that this then allows for fee simple units, but that's what I wanted to check with Minnie.
Yeah.
So I'll get back to you on that one and see.
So then that would be the opposite, because each fee simple would have to have their own utilities
Yes,
running to their own home.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be the opposite of what I was thinking. And then the last thing is I'm trying to visualize courtyard apartments, and the example that you showed, I think, was single story. And I don't know what the building height limits are in multifamily medium, multifamily high, but I'm thinking of these lovely courtyard examples in London, which are my favorite, in urban settings where they're really tall and they share a courtyard. Is that dreamable in our, say, multifamily high?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially so, we brought up the other day, I brought up that we just recently lowered the maximum height on multifamily high East Sunset. And so you can do 40 feet or 3 stories, whichever is lower. So in my opinion, that's ideal right there. The heights are about the same. It's 45 feet for other multifamily high zones, and with a maximum of 60 or 65 feet. And multifamily medium is lower. Yeah, so it would work, yes, with the height.
Yes. Commissioner Kennedy?
So I'm curious about, we're talking about permitted uses and how that relates to the parking study. would there be a difference in, parking study is a study. I mean, will there be any change to parking, allowable parking, required parking per unit? Would there be any change to that? Because you talked about, some places don't require there to be any parking per unit or just one parking per unit. And so then the question is, that would very much impact, if you build apartments, you build a big structure with a lot of units and put no parking for it, how that then impacts the entire neighborhood because everyone's scrambling to go find parking somewhere. So the parking study versus these proposed amendments to allowed buildings.
So I'm going to let Thomas jump in anytime too, but I am going to say that one of the reasons for the parking study is that we have, hopefully, light rail coming here, which means that you then develop a whole transit-oriented development neighborhood. And when you have transit-oriented development neighborhoods, you generally have less to no parking because you're right there next to a transit or, a station, and you can hop on there, or there are lots of trains. Thomas, feel free to jump in if I'm misspeaking.
Yeah, no, that's definitely right. We'll be looking at the off-street parking requirements by land use type. So the maximum and minimum that would be required for each housing type would be looked at.
Okay, which is great when we get light rail. Absolutely, you put those near, transit like that. Until then, we could build that and have a real problem.
And something that Thomas came up with during Title 18, I think it was Thomas, I'm going to give you credit, was that, now we have Tier 2 and Tier 1 parking. So Tier 2 is more of the suburban parking because we recognize that we are not yet an urban city, and people are still very car dependent. So we do recognize that, and it came up when we were doing Central Issaquah as well. And we've had some issues, but we've had issues up in the Highlands too. But that's one of the reasons we need to do it, because we're changing. So we need to be able to meet the needs that we have now and then sort of try and anticipate what we'll have in the future, long-range planning. So that's the purpose of it. I mean, we're not going to know every answer, but yes, we may say if you do apartments, you have to have, right now our code says that if you have a unit that is less than 500 square feet and within a quarter of a mile, you only have to have 0.7 parking spaces per unit. And apartments, 5 bedrooms are considered 1 unit. 5 of those pods are considered 1 unit because there's 1 kitchen. And our definition of residence is that you have 5 unrelated persons living together. So that's how that works.
Thank you, Carolyn. See, now we're saying, should we have it a permitted use? But we're not, wouldn't say that I understand your definition and the ramifications of the definition in the permitted use well enough to say that I could, oh good, we're going to look at that. I'd have to, we have until 2 weeks from now, right? Okay, good. Because there could be ways of looking at this, and thank you for raising the flag about parking requirements. And one thing that I was considering is rather than attaching parking requirements to the type of unit, that parking requirements should be attached to where the property is. It could be a cottage, that could be a courtyard apartment that's sitting right next to the train station, and it might not need parking. It's not because it's a micro unit or a courtyard, it's because of where it's located. So I think that our, when we do look at those parking requirements, we should look at adjacency to a walkable community and transit, which I think maybe we already do a little bit of that. But that's where I'm looking rather than hooking it up to the definition of the property. But I do want to read this. Thank you. I'm sorry if it was in the packet and I didn't study it enough, but I will now.
No, we've got time. I haven't started the packet yet. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Commissioner Altamore.
So I toured those apartments, the micro units in Kirkland, and part of the design is the expectation that you are setting to the residents too. Like they know that it is Hunger Games for parking. and that makes them decide whether or not they're going to live there. I just really want to encourage all of us to, yes, it's really frustrating, and those of us who have lived in places where it's crazy for parking, it is really frustrating, but I do think we need to look forward because we need density. And something like this, particularly as I'm thinking about right now, having two 20-somethings who need to move out, and there need to be some places, and I love them in case they ever see this, but there need to be places for them to go. So I understand we all have those nightmare parking pieces, but I do want us to really think forward with things like micro units or the cottages, because I think there are solutions to this. And I think TOD, like the transit-oriented, where we would have much, much lower parking requirements does make sense, but also being a little bit more flexible for the future pieces. I just want us to keep an open mind about that.
Commissioner Krass?
Clarifying question. So if there are changes to parking requirements per unit for new development, does there also, for existing of like buildings, does it change for them as well? Meaning, is there, if there's already a apartment building that they had to do 2 per unit, and now it's 1 per unit for new development, do they also, are they grandfathered to go, can they go back to 1 and now they have more space to do something different with that apartment building? And does that need to be addressed as part of this, whether it's only new or it's all?
That's an interesting question. I mean, so if we did, I'd have to look. But I would imagine, say they wanted to do an addition. Again, always remember, like when I said, maybe you do 0. That's me talking off the top of my head, okay? That's not me saying that we're going to do 0 parking. But so that's what I'm saying, because this is just an example, maybe, and I have to look into it. But if somebody wanted to do an addition, their existing parking, say an apartment building wanted to do an addition, their existing parking might count toward those new units that they put in, and they wouldn't have to put in new parking.
Because, for example, there's a big apartment complex next to my home, and they probably have to have a certain number of units or parking spots per unit the way it is now. And if it changed and now they only need half that parking, they could build a lot more buildings in that area, and all of a sudden now. So I wasn't sure if it was only for new or if it included existing and new. That's the only question.
Well, and you're right, they could build a lot more buildings, but they're still going to need parking. So it's not like they can just come in and build a new building and take up all those parking spaces, because some of those are still going to be needed for any new building that went in. They wouldn't just be wiped out. Unless we said no parking is required, Yeah. I'll have to look more closely into that one, though. I'm a long-range planner, not a current planner, so I'd have to check with them. And remember, we're not talking parking yet.
Right.
This is,
Please,
Except-
Commissioner Milligan.
Except your definition says they typically do not provide parking spaces
okay.
in the definition. Can you update that so that we can look at that separately?
You can look at it now. I mean, if it's something that you all want to talk about.
Well, we don't have the parking study yet, though.
Commissioner Esmwala.
For the parking study that's yet to come, how far out does that go? Like in the sense of that it's studying the past, present, and projecting into the future, the need?
Thomas?
So we'll be looking towards the future. So it's for like new development
Okay.
coming through. Yeah.
So based on the census data and then formulating what's to come, basically.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have the scope of work in front of me,
Okay.
but typically it's like looking at peer cities in the area, what they require. It'd be looking at sort of like land uses and just making sure that what we're doing is aligned with like sort of where we should be going towards the future for a new development.
And then I guess it'll also factor in some of what we're kind of talking about right now, the type of like zoning basically as well, such that some areas may not need the 2 parking spaces basically. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be looking sort of, one of the things that's been mentioned here is the proximity to like good transit.
Transit.
So that would be something we'd be looking at too. Making sure that the context is like sort of included in addition to like the type of use that's being proposed.
Very well, thank you.
And you asked about looking at future numbers and what we can accommodate. We do have buildable lands numbers, so we have our capacities by zone. So we know up to 2044, based on our existing zoning, how
Okay.
much capacity we have in each area.
And by then, I think light rail.
Pardon me?
Well, it's a joke.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, you're so kind. Kristen, a few minutes ago, you said something about housing units I'm still looking at micros here. Housing unit size and the number of parking per unit if the unit is a particular size. That went really fast by me. Tell me that again.
So two separate things is currently in our code, if you have a unit that is 500 square feet or smaller, and you're within a quarter mile of a transit center, then you can lower your parking space requirement to 0.75 parking spaces per unit. Yeah.
Commissioner Issaquah.
I have to ask, what is 0.75? Is that like a compact or like,
No, it means the number of spaces. So if you have
okay.
two units, you would need 1.5 spaces, which so ultimately you'd have two, or yeah. But the more you get, the fewer spaces you have, I think. That's how we look
Okay.
at.
Okay.
I'm going to follow the thought exercise here. So a developer who doesn't want to do parking, for whatever reason, comes in and finds a location near, or has a location near transit, would be incentive, I don't know what what's the, it reduces it to 0.7, but what is it above 500 square feet? Is it 1-to-1?
Is what?
How
one-
much the requirement? How much does the requirement go down from?
So you go from 1 space to 0.75 spaces.
Okay, so 1-to-1 unit, per unit, if it's above 500 square
If
feet.
it's above 500 square feet, then yes, it's 1 to
It's
1,
1-to-1, okay. Okay, so then.
depending on the zone.
So the benefit would be a 30% reduction if you made all of your units 499 square feet.
Yeah.
Just as a thought exercise.
I'm usually okay with numbers, but it's exploding.
Okay, okay.
I think
But that's under our current code.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Okay.
And you have to be close to transit.
Quarter of a mile. Yeah.
The reason I wanted to do that is that when we're looking at cost savings for developers, and we're creating an incentive that is saying that we could be creating an incentive that's saying we prefer micro units that are below 500 square feet by saying we're going to give you a bonus for that, meaning you don't have to create as many parking spaces. So I'm just thinking of what are the outcomes that we might get now that we're implementing a definition for micros. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying which way the tide would turn.
Essentially, they're both going to be studios. The micro unit or yeah.
Commissioner Issaquah.
And something like that would have to be balanced, because of course, a family of so many kids can't stay in the studio, of course. So developments like that would have to be balanced with other developments that allow for a larger space for families. But also, we have to think about how we can incentivize developers for those type of spaces too, as well, and with the parking issue as well, as it relates to having those homes and areas for those larger families around that transit center. So to look into that as well.
That's a good point, yeah.
I love what you just said, and so I want to ask then, if you had a development that was mixed, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and micro units, do the micro units in effect get the parking bonus?
So we don't have micro units yet.
Well, we're
We're
going
doing-
to get them.
Okay, so your question again was if you have,
So you have an apartment building with a unit mix that included 3 bedrooms and micro units, would the property have a reduction in parking requirements based on the number of micro units? The point.
the property as a whole, I don't feel like I'm the right person to answer this question. It's
Well,
often up
it
to
is a
it's
question.
often up to the developer and not to me, how they assign these spaces. So yes, overall,
No,
it's
but
going to
the
have fewer
Minimum
spaces.
required parking could be reduced
Right.
to some of the units micro,
Yes.
even if it's in a property that has 3-bedroom units.
Yes.
I'm just talking a little bit about there.
I think these are great questions. Any further questions? Kristen, more to share?
That's all I have.
Commissioner Patterson?
So I've been kind of sponging the information and trying to figure out what direction to go. So, and you just brought up the slide. So for the public hearing that we'd have in a couple weeks, is this ultimately what we'll be discussing is these 4 points?
The first point.
First point only? Okay. I wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yeah. We haven't addressed 2, 3, and 4 yet, but we really haven't answered number 1, which is really kind of left up to next week. You know, I think you guys will answer that next week, whether or not you want us to move forward with this, because.
Well, it sounds like
On the 23rd,
two of these type of housings are already allowed. It's just, like you said, they're not well-defined.
right.
So, yeah, I think
Right.
that helps me figure what I would say, which was, yeah, we need definitions.
Right.
Commissioner Kennedy?
So are we going to help with the definitions? Just because, as you pointed out on the micro units, it sort of talks about, because they often have no parking, you know, leaving that out of a definition of what a micro unit is, so that we don't sort of get into the speculation of what they often have, but we define it very clearly.
That's what I want you guys to do. Yeah. Are you okay if we move forward? And like I said, I have the definitions, and we can pull them up and start talking about them. And if you say, you know, I'd like to see this changed, we can try and come up with alternatives before the 23rd. And if that works better, great. And if you guys still want to tweak it, we can tweak it. So, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, you guys are used to having the bigger picture kind of whole code thing, but now we're getting specific. So let's go specific.
Yeah, let's go, well, I guess let's come back to, let's get the other 2 definitions. We'll come back to
Okay.
micro units.
Okay, okay, here, cottage housing.
I think somewhere on the agenda it actually said that even use condominiums as an example, and that's basically what this is, correct? For the most part.
They're detached units, though.
Okay. Attached single. Got it. So they don't have like, they don't share common walls, things like that.
Right.
Commissioner Milligan, let it begin.
Thank you. Why do was one thing that popped up in my mind while I was reading the packet. Why do we have number 1 where it says that in a cottage housing development, just push in anyway, for the heck of it, it has to be suitable for a single person or a very small family? Why couldn't they be bigger based on other criteria in the code for, I don't know, floor area ratio or something? Why do you have to say that? Isn't it already said somewhere?
I think, the purpose of it is really just to sort of limit the size of them, because they are supposed to be somewhere between about 1,200 and 1,700 square feet and no bigger. So if there's a better way to say that, I'm all for
Yeah,
it.
so wouldn't it be clearer to talk about the size versus a single person or very small family? Because that's a very squishy definition.
We
Very small
can.
family for some people is 3 people, whereas very small family for others is a single person.
I can do some research and see if there's some sizes out there. We just want to make sure that we just didn't pull it out for the sky and say, yeah, we just picked, 1,700 square feet. They can't go bigger. We have to have a reason for doing it. So I can do some research and see if there are any sizes that are listed in other codes.
Does anyone have any contention with point 4 where it says off-street parking? Because again, I think to Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Milligan's point earlier, I mean, do you strip that out of the definition or do you say TBD, parking study 2024?
What are the requirements for parking in mixed use, multifamily, medium, and multifamily high anyway?
Well, if these are considered single-family houses, because it's not by zone, if they're considered single-family houses, it's 2 spaces per lot, per house.
So is that where parking is addressed?
Yes.
Is in that? And it would, by definition, be off-street?
Yes.
Yes, so I don't think you have to say it here. You could, but the point, this could move up into the parking could be shared in a courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
So that would need to be said,
Okay.
perhaps.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Okay, so I'm feeling really dense on number 3. Units may be located on platted lots or as units in a condominium. We've already said their construction characteristics of a single-family house, and you've said they're all detached. So I'm confused by the units in a condominium part of the description.
So they're called condominiums because they are several units on one undivided lot. You're right, it is confusing, and I can fix that. But I have, in a neighborhood next to me, there are 26 units. They are all detached, but they're on an undivided parcel. So when you look it up in the King County Assessor, it's called a condominium. Because they own the house and not the property. Yeah, but I can see, I mean, it's a technical thing, so I can see if there's another way to say that. Maybe undivided lot or something like that.
Yeah, something that
Or maybe it doesn't need to be said at all. If we have, like I said, I'll check with Minnie about the fee simple, and maybe it doesn't need to be mentioned at all. Yeah, I'll see.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it to be just fee simple. You want to allow for shared, yeah.
Commissioner Grass?
So I understand the intent of these are single-family units. Do they need to be could they be townhouses? And why would, or is that called something different? Is it?
It's a townhouse. It is something different. The intent is that they don't have shared walls, they tend to be a little less expensive. They don't have shared walls. There are advantages to this over
I understand
townhomes
that, but
for
I mean, it's cheaper to build them if they share some walls, like if you had groups of 2, but we're saying we don't want that? Is that the intent of?
No, we're just trying to give options. The city wants more diverse housing, more options for people out there. And right now, we don't allow this kind of development in
Okay.
the city.
But the other, like if there were townhouses like this, that already exists, and this is just a new thing in addition to that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not saying we don't want another one. We want to add to our list.
Got it.
Yeah.
Any further questions, concerns about cottage housing? Okay,
Okay.
let's try the next definition. Commissioner Milligan.
Yeah, Commissioner Krass, I think this might be where those townhomes could come in the same sort of format of a shared space, but they're attached. They would be attached in a courtyard. And
Townhouses are, apartments are rents on this townhouse.
so then that's going to be my follow-up question, thank you very much, is that courtyard apartments, are you implying here that these are always rentals in the Northwest vernacular?
Well, and that's why courtyard housing is in there. So we could change it to courtyard housing
Yeah, just
and then
call it-
say rented or owned, or don't even have to say it,
Don't have
just
to
courtyard
say it.
housing.
Yeah,
Right, because this to me just sounds like
True.
a typical, well, at least it sounds like the condominiums that I'm very familiar with. Down there, what is that, Windsong, Arrington Place? That sounds almost exactly like what this is. I think actually Arrington Place used to be apartments before it was converted, so. Any questions, concerns as far as courtyard apartments?
Well, I think just as you said, use the verbiage that's actually applicable. If they're not, if it's apartments isn't the limitation, if it's housing, so that
Right.
we're being super, super clear and crisp in the language.
Well, in my note, I have to change it from courtyard apartments to just take out the apartments and just call it courtyard housing in my notes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Want to give it a shot one more time, micro unit?
I don't know.
Let's do it. Now that everyone's had a few minutes. Commissioner Milligan.
why is the minimum 125 feet, square feet?
It's not a minimum, it's just generally that's how big they are. There is a minimum size for livable space. I have to check on exactly what it is, but I'll look.
Yeah, 125 square.
When they don't have a bathroom or a kitchen, there's another name for that, isn't there? What is it called? Community.
Well, there's an
A
SR.
dorm.
Sorry.
There's an,
Kids in college.
SRO,
Yeah,
the single room
SRO.
occupancy.
Okay, I was thinking of a different one, but that's fine with me. Yeah, I wonder if it's appropriate to bundle them together if they're the same. Is a micro unit the same as having a bedroom with shared bathrooms and kitchen? Do we need two definitions if we want to
Commissioner
allow?
Altsmore, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually single-room occupancies are more like a house that's been converted, and so it's more of a single-family house that's been converted with one kitchen and one living area for everybody. But I see your point, too. Yes.
Here, that has tended to be true. Back east, it tends to be those much, much larger, really what's being
Okay.
described here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe micro units, also known as single-room occupancies.
So I think my inclination from a pure definition perspective would be to stop at the end of the definition of, larger shared kitchens, bathrooms, community space, period. The part that says these units are generally built, blah, 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 and sort of gives a description of
Okay.
what's often part of them is great information, but not part of the definition per se.
Okay. I see that.
I
Okay.
agree.
Commissioner Patterson.
This is kind of in agreement or in alignment with those comments, but looking back at the previous definition, what I appreciate about that is it defined what it was without getting into specifics that puts it in a box, right? Where if I'm a developer, I'm like, oh, I can build micro units here, but now we're saying, well, you can, but they have to be this, this, and this, and it's almost like getting into code territory, whereas a definition should be
Concise.
clear, concise, but broad enough to, to cover all the options.
If that's the case, and good point, would you all want to just remove the whole square foot piece of it, or leave it in there? Or maybe not have a minimum, unless I find out that there is a legal reason for a minimum, and just say maximum? Because you're right, that's kind of codish.
Yeah, I would say it is, because, I mean, typically there is usually a minimum, like for like a person to actually inhabit a space. So I would probably say probably added that definition, and that's probably referencing another code essentially. And maybe even just referencing the code, because codes change as well.
Oh, yeah, reference
Yeah.
building code.
Yeah.
Commissioner Alford.
I would go along with what Commissioner Awesome-Wade just said. I think if we make this tied to the code, because if I'm just a general member of the community and I see that this micro housing or micro units gets added and there isn't any sort of specificity, and I saw a documentary on Japan or something like that where I might be thinking of, something extremely more micro. Yes, a shelf, right. And so I think that there is some utility to having those numbers in there, and I know it's not specific, but I think we should either say can be, but is tied to code and is typically X, because I think that that will be much more accessible to the community who might see this.
Okay, I like that.
You did a lot better that time around, huh? Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. So are we saying no square footage guidelines here because it's picked up somewhere else? No. What are we saying?
My preference would be that we do include the typical piece, but say the actual numbers will align with Issaquah code or something like that. Because I think it does make this, without that, this doesn't have any sort of definition in people's mind.
Okay.
Right. So often when things are built, there's a minimum size, or you have to have a certain roof, or you have to have a certain thickness and wall and all that kind of stuff, but you can just refer to that and say, a size defined as in the building code, to 2024 building code, or what, or the building code,
I find it helpful
current.
just because I think of what's been in the news lately a lot with like the tiny housing. And I can't imagine those are more than 200 square feet, if not even smaller, right?
Yeah.
Those are tiny housing. Commissioner Milligan.
Another question, it goes to this name, I can't quite think what it is. Congregate housing, maybe that's the word I'm thinking of. Okay, so in micro units, is there, or somewhere else, a requirement for the number of bathrooms per unit, the number of kitchens per unit, or something like that? Is there a reason for it, and does it exist somewhere else?
Again, I think it would be dictated by the building code, but I think that it's typically about, one kitchen for every 5 units is what's required. Yeah. And then there are other specifications, like if you're going to have a kitchenette, it's actually not considered a kitchen. It's, you just have your microwave and things like that. Yeah.
Commissioner Altamore.
Congregate housing usually doesn't have bedrooms.
Yeah.
You're all in one space.
That's what I thought, more like a, yeah.
So it kind of sounds like maybe to clean this up, keep some of the square footage to Commissioner Esamwada's point with a reference to code, and then to Commissioner Kennedy's point, everything after community space drop. Sound right?
And I also have to, the square footage, refer to code, and then micro units, also known as single room occupancies.
Yeah.
And I'm going to look into that and make sure that those definitions do actually match each other before I throw it in there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was a fun exercise.
Oh, good.
All right.
Little different from the past year and a half, huh? Okay. All right, that's all I have. Oops.
I thought there was a question too. No, that's for May 23rd.
May 23rd?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop sharing. What just happened? There we go. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you again, commissioners, for that amazing conversation. Hopefully staff was able to take something away that they can work on and bring back to us for our public hearing in 2 weeks. That is all we have for regular business. Kristen, now we're up to reports. Do you have any city council updates that you'd like to share with all of us?
I am happy to announce that City Council on May 1st adopted Title 18. Yay! It becomes effective. They are putting all the formatting on the website now. It becomes effective on June 1st. And everything will be up on June 1st. Yeah.
Excellent.
So I think that's all I have. It's pretty big, though.
Yeah, no, that's a big one. That was a big part of
Thank you
everyone's
all.
lives.
Oh, and there is a party, you all got an invitation that on May 31st, I think at Pickering Barn.
Sounds right.
I think that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
6:30
for
or 6.
commissioners and staff and so forth who worked on Title 18. So
Right.
you're all invited.
Party. All right, any other business or announcements from staff, fellow commissioners? All right, anything for the good of the order? Again, it's been great to see everybody. It seems like every time we see each other, it's been longer and longer in between. But it sounds like we're going to be doing some ride-alongs in June to go look at some of this housing out there. Be interesting to see where staff takes us. Other than that, I want to again, oh, Kristen.
I apologize. You just brought up a good point, though. Be sure to fill out your doodle polls if you haven't yet. Yeah. Thank you.
I just got a lesson on doodle polls, so thank you. All right, and again, want to thank everybody for earlier, for the elections and everything, and looking forward to working with all of you guys this summer, and also on this important work for the comprehensive plan. It's a new start for our commission, and should be a fun rest of the year. So, again, thank you, and tonight we will adjourn our meeting at 7:48 PM. Thank you.